Get started? All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission's quarterly board meeting. My name is Keith Gertz. I'm the Regional Director for DEC's Region 4. I also serve as the board chair. Let's go around and introduce the Executive Director and the other board members. To my left is Chris Hauver, Executive Director. To Chris's left is Mike McLaughlin, representing Albany County. Next to Mike, representing, is Jessica Atney Mahar, representing the Nature Conservancy. Going around the table, Steve Rice, Citizen Rep. Nancy Pearson, Citizen Rep. Representing Town of Connie, Mike Lyons. Rick Georgeson will be taking the minutes for DEC. The Supervisor of the Town of Gilland, Peter Barber. And Citizen Rep. John Bruss. First order of business is to consider the minutes of the last board meeting. Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Second. All in favor? Okay. So now we'll open the floor to the public.
Just want to give people a quick update from the Friends of the Pine Bush. Has everybody heard of the New York Nonprofit Revitalization Act? We hadn't either. So it was passed in 2013, and there's all kinds of rules that nonprofits have to follow that many of them don't even know about yet. I said it was 2013, right? So anyway, so what did it mean to the Friends? I met an attorney. We had to go through and redo our bylaws. The two main differences are if you have something called a member, they really better be a member, meaning they have they have to be part of the administration. You have to have a formal process to have things approved. So we're not using that word anymore. We're still Friends of the Pine Bush. The other difference is they're going to look really closely at any quid pro quo. So if we say you get 10% off at something, or we'll do a free program, or we'll take you on a hike, you have to have a value for that, and it's not tax deductible. So we've turned into two kinds of membership. If you want those things, we have 3 things up to $50. We'll do that, and you'll get no tax write-off. We have a donation category, and you can do that, and then it's 100% tax deductible. The rest is all regulatory, so the New York State can come in and look at things. They can make sure you're doing everything right. I think for the most part it's good. We're going to have specific committees. There are very specific rules on how you keep your records and your finances. And I think we've got that pretty much in order. So I'm reporting that we've done it. Didn't know if you heard about it. I think a lot of people haven't. So that's my quarterly update. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So I don't have anything to report this quarter. Welcome, Harvey. No problem. Is there any reports coming from the rest of the board? Okay. It's all yours, Chris.
Okay. I've got a number of things. I just we passed around the annual report. This is the annual report that we do to be in compliance with the Public Authorities Law. And it's also something that I work with as a handout when I meet with elected leaders, other VIPs, and just people in general. And it's a nice summary. Thank you, Wendy Craney, for putting this together, and for the staff for getting the information together. Wendy finished this yesterday because of both of us, but it's done. But it's still a draft. So take a look. If you see anything that's missing or there's a typo in it, let us know. Let me know, and we'll correct it. Hot off the press, but again, this is the report. So this goes from 16 to 17. So this ended in March this year. Also passed around that map. We'll get to that when we do the resolution. Just so you know, we did, in the update, it talks about prescribed fire. We burned 100 acres based on that update when that was produced. Last week, Tyler and his crew burned another 16, and tomorrow they're planning to burn 12. So this is something that's in the past probably 3 years now, we're seeing more opportunities, probably on top of all the work that we've been doing in preparation for burning, but more opportunities to burn in the fall. If you remember, most of the burning was done in the spring and summer, so that would bring us up to 128 acres for the season, based on tomorrow. The Hudson River Valley Ramble is it's a series of recreational opportunities, not just recreation, but historic, across the Hudson River Valley, and we are a part of it. We have a number of programs in this. If you're interested, there's a couple of these I can pass around. There's more out at the front desk. We have our third chat with staff hour. I think I've mentioned this before, at least I know I did at the last board meeting in June. Something that we're doing, having an informal opportunity to have the public come in and just talk to us. So we have 2 members of the directors team here and just open discussion. People can come in and ask questions, they can complain, they can do whatever they want. And we, the last one that we had in June 22nd, Joel and I were at, we had some individuals that came in that, I would say they complained. They had some constructive feedback that was actually pretty useful for us, and their neighbors living right adjacent to the preserve. One person we've known for many years, but he had some ideas that we've implemented because we never expressed them before. So the next one is this upcoming one. Neil and Wendy will be doing it. It's September 23rd, which is this Saturday. The first 2 are in the evening at 7. This one's on a weekend, so it gives opportunities for people who may not be able to make things in the evening. Smokey Bear Day is Columbus Day. This is our annual event. This is our second largest event next to the Lupin Fest. This brings in anywhere between 300 and 600 people, depending on the weather. If it's a nice day, we really get a lot of people. Jessica knows because her daughter Stephanie loves Smokey. And it's usually a fun day, so I can pass that around.
Is this like the opposite of typical where you encourage fire?
No, you encourage safe fire.
Oh, safe.
Yeah.
Safe fire. Fire safety.
That's not you, right?
That is not me. I don't fit in Smokey. Maybe I did at one point. Pine Bush Perspectives. This is a little card. I can pass this around too. This is our third annual photo exhibit. It's a juried photo exhibit where anybody can submit photos to us. And we display a number of those photos here in this room. Actually, we display, no, not all of them because we can't anymore. We narrow it down, we display those photos, and then people vote on them. And we work with the Friends, and the Friends generate gifts for the top 3 winners. Top 3 winners and People's Choice. So there's actually 4 winners. So that the deadline for that is October 18th. So that's another fun thing. We are updating our website. We're not updating our website, we're creating a whole new website. And we have a team we have a committee that's doing that in-house. Wendy Craney is the lead on that team. We hope to have that done, I would say, early November. Is that good? I would say. But it's going to be something that it's going to be completely a different approach where it's more interactive. It gives you more information. It's less, if I have to be frank about it, since I played a big role in the last one too, less government, less hard science, but all that stuff is still there, but it's also easier for folks to understand. And one of the key things that we got out of this audience development plan with our strategic planning with Shelley a few years ago was just because somebody doesn't come to the Pine Bush doesn't mean that they won't support it, and they don't support it, and they don't like it. Maybe they hate being outside, maybe they're scared of ticks, maybe they're scared of whatever, but they can follow what we do and really appreciate it. So technology and social media plays a big role for people in that situation. Okay, so finally, I just need to follow up. I sent everybody an email yesterday, sorry for the late notice, for some potential for some draft legislation. So remember in the June meeting, we had this discussion where there's a number of properties in the study area that have become available. I say a number, a handful, say 4. And now that there's significantly more state money through the Environmental Protection Fund, there are significantly more people knocking at the door for these projects, and people have been waiting for a long time. The Open Space Conservation Plan has a lot of areas in it. We're one of them, and yeah, we're a priority, but we have to get in line. So the situation is both agencies, Parks and DEC, have a limited amount of staff and all these projects to do. So Steve Rice has a piece of property, he wants to sell it to the commission, he wants to close it in, say, 12 months. Things are backlog 2.5 years. Steve's not going to wait. You know, so we're kind of in an interesting spot that's compromising our ability to protect land. Fast forward, I have conversations. Keith and I had a conversation at central office in DEC and central office in Parks with those staff, and came up with an idea of what if we modify our legislation akin to that of the Central Pine Barrens Commission in Long Island, use the relationship we have with the Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy with their expertise to help us with land acquisition, use our funding and our reserve account to buy the land if we can modify our legislation to hold title. And I would foresee that as we would do that on a temporary basis. We would borrow the money from our reserve account, we'd buy the property, and then we'd sell it to the state just like anybody else would, like the Nature Conservancy used to be able to do. And then we would get the money back, and then we could do it again. So, recommendation was, take this to the executive committee. The executive committee met, discussed this last Friday, and the determination was, yes, we should move forward with that. And I have draft language that was drafted by staff in DEC and Parks to move forward with it. There's a cover memo and the actual language of the law to change that. So that's the recommendation of the executive committee. I don't know that we need a resolution on it, but we should discuss it if there are concerns to discuss. The board's going to have to vote on any acquisition. So if I don't know why I keep picking on Steve, but Steve's got all the property apparently. So who knew? So we have an individual has property. I'm going to bring that to the board. The board's going to review that and have to vote whether or not to pursue it and to spend the money, because that money won't be budgeted. It's not in it's not an operating account, it's a reserve account, so you have to prove every acquisition.
I think it's a great idea. It allows us to respond in a timely fashion, and some of these property transactions will take these properties out of, will eliminate the opportunity for any acquisition for a generation or for,
Right.
tens of years, or we'll see development creating more of a patchwork. So this is exactly what we should be doing.
I guess the only drawback, could potentially be where the state would say, well, you can buy your own land now. No, this is on a piece by piece. We don't have unlimited funding. We can do this in a pinch. We can do this on occasion, but we can't do it a lot. We still need the state to help.
Yep.
And liability was brought up at a discussion, and talking with folks in both agencies, the liability risk if the commission holds title versus having property dedicated, having care and custody, it's the same. And we have an insurance policy that would cover it on top of state coverage.
Does this have to go through the legislature?
Yeah.
So how long do you think that would take?
Well, I guess what we would do is Jessica and I have worked for a number of years on projects in the legislature and the executive office as well. I would bring it to the legislature to be carried in this session, so that would, I started early, but session doesn't start until the end of January, it ends in June. And I've already talked to at least our assembly person, Assembly Member Fahey, who was very interested in carrying it, at least in that house.
So you already have somebody in line to actually introduce it then?
And I would probably approach, go ahead.
Well, we don't always get a choice.
No.
So we have people who would be willing to support it, but that conversation would have to evolve.
That's true. Yeah, it depends who would
It's
carry it.
complicated.
But you wouldn't have a problem finding someone to carry it. That's the important part.
Right. It's Amadors and Breslins, both. Yep. Both of which either would carry it. So that's the update. That's my long-winded update. Anything else? I'm done.
Okay. Next, on behalf of the technical committee, will be Neil Gifford.
Morning, everyone. to our quarterly update. New projects in the study area have been relatively slow, so the committee has only actually met twice, but once this quarter. All the projects in here, except for one, are updates. So if you look at the summary for each project, there's a small section at the very end of each project in italics that highlights what's new. So that you can, at a glance, look at that and see what's new for each of those projects. There are a couple I'd like to highlight. First one being the landfill restoration project. And they're in the process of concluding another year's worth of vegetation, hydrology, and zoological surveys. And all indications are the wetland restoration work, the habitat restoration work, even the test plots in the landfill continue to be successful. I don't know if I mentioned it at the June meeting, but I'm amazed that they keep finding these rare species in this newly created habitat. One was the yellow-breasted chat, which is the largest North American warbler, and hadn't been seen in the pine bush for over 64 years. 1932 was the last time that it was documented in the preserve, and it showed up in the landfill restoration site. But it's going well. They have one small wetland that they're continuing to create and modify so that the city can meet all of the Army Corps of Engineers requirements as far as their wetland mitigation numbers, but that's going well. And the last thing that we've been waiting on this year, as you can see, the landfill is split. You know, it splits Carnerbrands East from the Rapp Road Barrens. Is restoring the landfill itself is the last piece of this. And part of the landfill is closed. The Greater Albany landfill is closed. That's where the test plots are, the 4-acre test plots are. The city has just literally this week responded to DEC's comments regarding the closure plan for the whole landfill. So what they're doing is taking the Part 360 regulatory closure plan for the landfill and marrying that with the habitat restoration plan for the landfill so that we end up with the native plant communities on it. And that needs to be approved by DEC. So they've gone back and forth once, and they just submitted that this week back to solid waste to be reviewed. Because ultimately that solid waste closure plan needs to be approved by DEC before they can begin implementing the closure of the Greater Albany landfill and incorporating native plants. And all indications are that should start, phase 1 of that should start next spring. The new project is also in the city of Albany, and it's down here at the bottleneck between the Cross Gates Carnarvon Butterfly subpopulation on the hill on the power line and Blueberry Hill. It's a really small parcel. On this map, you can't even really see it. It's 29C. It's a 2-acre parcel where the applicant came in and presented a concept plan to the technical committee at last month's meeting, and they're in the process of submitting a plan for a 24-unit apartment building on those 2 acres, and the details are in the summary there. It's 30 Pine Lane, number 2 on your list. And once the city receives that application, we anticipate getting a copy of that full application. At that point, we comment on it. They are proposing to set aside 0.86 of the 2 acres in a conservation easement, which would be contiguous with the existing conservation easement and management agreement we have with the Daughters of Sarah and the Catholic Diocese, respectively. But the project is proposed on an area that's recommended for full protection. It's adjacent to occupied endangered species habitat. So there are a number of steps they'll need to go through in evaluating endangered species occupation and habitat in coordination with DEC and Fish and Wildlife Service. Otherwise, the rest of them are all updates. The big project over here in Guilderland, the senior living, was approved by the planning board and previously received a zoning change from the town board. And they're basically waiting on that property to close, and once they get their building permit, that will then trigger the mitigation measures, which includes effectively a dedication of 39.9 acres to the town for dedication to the preserve, as well as some financial mitigation associated with offsetting impacts in full protection area 3. As you can see, that's contiguous with existing preserve. That was the big one. And I continue to attend the Colony Comprehensive Plan meetings to keep the technical committee and you all abreast of that. They're still in the data gathering process of updating the town of Colony's comprehensive plan. That's it. Unless you have questions about any of those projects, I'd be happy to entertain.
You know, these all seem to be progressing like usual. Are there any concerns you have about any one in particular? where their folks are not being responsive to you?
No, and I think the relationships we develop with the municipalities are carrying over to applicants. And in this case with the new one, Hirschberg is involved with that project, and he's been through enough projects in the Pine Bush where they're coming to the table with what they hope is a compromise in mind.
More realistic?
Yeah, much more realistic, particularly for an out-of-the-gate presentation. Usually there's an extreme on one end, and then we work toward the middle ground. But no, short answer to your question, it seems to be going well. But I'm a little surprised with the lack of activity. There's just not a whole lot of new development being proposed in full protection areas. Oh, the other one I should mention is in Colony, is up in 52A, 8 Loopy Way is in your packet. And that will also involve, it's a full protection area, but it will also involve a significant potential donation of land to offset impacts of residential subdivision in the town of Colony. Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Lisa with an update on the financial reporting.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Your financial statements represent year-to-date figures as of July 31st, 2017. On the revenue side, dues and contributions are slightly over budget, and this is just due to an increase in donations through July 31st. Government grant income and contract money is directly related to expenses and is slightly under budget. We have less spending at the beginning of the year. Mitigation fees are 145% of budget, and this is based on an increase in tonnage from the landfill versus budget. Lease revenue is on budget for the year, and other revenue is $6,100 higher, and this is due to both an increase in merchandise sales and program fees. Total.
While you're selling the revenue,
Yeah.
mine doesn't, at the mitigation fees, I don't know if this is a typo or it seems like it's a 0% of the budget. Is that
It's 86,000 versus 60.
60, and it's just.
It might be a typo on yours.
It says 0%.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Oh,
We
yeah, it
had
does.
0 probably last quarter and the formula
okay.
didn't carry.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, it's 145%.
Okay. Makes more sense.
We'll fix that. So total revenue came in at 94% through the month of July. Personnel and fringe are under budget, and this is due to benefit payments, and this will catch up over time throughout the year. Travel and training is slightly under budget due to the timing of budget and actual expenses. And a lot of these expenses are budgeted in the beginning of the year, and these throughout the year, these will catch up also. Contractual is very close to budget. Communications is at 45% of budget due to the timing of printing projects and production and fabrication. Occupancy is over budget due to an increase in repairs in the Discovery Center. Supplies and equipment are at 47% of budget, and this is just due to conservative spending at the beginning of the year. Other expenses are slightly under budget due to the timing of expenses. So overall, both revenue and expenses came in under budget for the month of July, giving us a higher net income of $165,000. Any questions? Okay. On to our statement of net assets. Cash and cash equivalents decreased. This is just due to expenditures and increase in spending. Conservation and land reserves remain the same. Grants receivable increased due to money owed from DEC, and this has been paid. Inventory remained the same. Prepaid expenses are 0, and this is due to the timing of year-end expenditures, and this will only occur in March of every year, at the end of every year. Investments increased $155,000 due to a positive performance in all 3 funds. Capital assets increased slightly due to work at the Barron's house, and deferred outflows from retirement. This remained the same. This will change on your January report. We get a report every year from New York State Retirement's actuarial calculations, and this will change in January, and it's based on the prior year. Total assets increased $277,000 over last year due to an increase in receivables and investments. On to liabilities. Liabilities decreased due to the payment of outstanding liabilities from last year. Deferred revenue remained the same, and the New York State pension liability remained the same. Again, this will change in January when we receive our GASB 68 reports from retirement. Total liabilities decreased slightly in June. And moving on to net assets, capital assets increased slightly due to repairs at the Barron's house. Reserved assets remained unchanged, and unreserved assets increased $317,000, giving us an increase of total net assets of $320,000 due to a positive NOI and an increase in investment. Any questions on that? Okay. Our last statement is an investment summary. The reserve fund, all three funds had a positive performance. Reserve fund had a positive performance through July of 1.33, and both the Discovery Center and Endowment have a positive performance of 4.02 and 3.97. Overall, our investments had a positive performance and a gain of $155,000. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Stacy? Okay, we're moving to our action items next. The first action item is the election of the board officers. So, Elaine's not here.
Nope, that's okay.
So we have Elaine as the vice chair, Don Sapos as secretary, and John Brust as treasurer. There's no changes proposed in those officers. Does anybody from the board want to have a comment or want to kick?
He's doing a great job.
Yeah, want to kick John off the board? Anybody want to do that?
That wasn't even a hesitation.
You know what? I knew something was coming. I thought it was going to come from Mike, but I didn't expect that.
Okay, so guess we'll make a motion to keep the officers as is.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
John was close.
5-4.
Close. Okay, now we're, do you want to talk about the Gilliland property?
Sure. So the second resolution, action item B, this is the acceptance of property that has been dedicated by the town of Gilliland to the preserve. And this is the formal action that the board has to take to accept dedication. If you look at as part of the resolution, there's the town board resolution and the map that's associated with it. I didn't have time to get a map in the board packet when I went out last week. Actually went out too well, whatever the case. Here's a map that indicates that property in comparison to where there's protected preserve land. So it's that yellow triangle, it's 0.36 acres, and it's a set aside as part of a development from the planning board, a planning board decision with the town of Gilliland. And it's adjacent to this protected property, which was a town park of Gilliland that was previously dedicated. Anybody have any questions?
Okay, so can I have a motion? Second? All in favor?
Thank you. Okay.
Is the developed property the piece right next to it?
Yep,
Okay.
that open area?
That's
I think it's a couple lots.
Okay.
Yeah, there's actually, it shows it as one lot, but basically that property with that yellow triangle was one lot. It turned it into a 3-lot subdivision, and we ended up with the corner piece.
For a little while, we had the bigger lot on because the development here is still on deed.
That's right. I forgot about that, right? Because I looked at the deed, and I said, oh, that's nice, but I don't think you want to give us that.
One or 3 tenths of an acre to like 7 acres or something like that. Okay, sure.
Yeah. But thank you, Peter, for being on top of that for us, too. Appreciate it. Exactly. Okay.
Okay, now we'll move along to our presentations. First is Erin with the External Education Partnerships. There she is.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'll get it, Aaron.
Yeah, okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to give a real quick update on where we are with STEM programming for middle school students here at the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. So we just have a couple of quick slides to show you. The projectors are still kind of warming up here. But when we last met, we were saying thank you and farewell to Dr. Fierro, who has really had done an exceptional amount of work building curriculum that incorporated the pine bush into the classroom at Farnsworth Middle School. And so in the wake of Dr. Fierro leaving, I wanted to give you an update on where we are with STEM programming with Farnsworth and other schools here in the preserve. So where are we heading? So a couple of things. We are continuing with STEM programming that's already in place. Some of this is work that Dr. Fierro worked on with us, and some is different. So we have the Habitat Watch, which is a program that we've been doing for multiple years now with Farnsworth. And we started with Alan, but now we have several new teachers that are going to be participating in this program this year. So we actually have 4 new teachers at Farnsworth that are kind of picking up where Dr. Fierro left off, and will be participating in Habitat Watch, which is a citizen science project for students where they come out to the landfill restoration area and collect data on different parts of the habitat there. And connected with that is our summer pond monitoring program with our junior docents that Blake heads up. And it's very similar curriculum, but that's also middle school, and that's also high school students that participate in that too. And just to back up, so the middle school STEM programming is a big part of the ADP, so that is a real focus that we have right now in the education department. We also have the student scientist program that was initially funded through a 3M grant that the Friends had applied for, and were successful in getting that to fund the development of that, and that Dr. Fierro had helped us create the curriculum for that, and that is continuing. We actually, we've been working mostly with Farnsworth on that, but we've had interest from the Brittenkill School District in that, and actually also the College of St. Rose, the education majors. So we work with the professor there, Mary Cosgrove. She's involving both of her classes. She has elementary ed students, and she also has students that are going into science education, or science education majors that are actually going to be participating in that program this fall. So that's really exciting, because here's a number of future teachers that will be engaging in this project. So that we'll carry that forward. And also, if you remember way back, Dr. Fierro participated in aspen girdling, aspen mechanical management here in the preserve. That's wrapped up. Now we're moving into honeysuckle management. So we had Alan came out, Dr. Fierro came out last year, and also a new teacher, Jill Dubois, came out from Farnsworth. So that is also continuing on as well. And I just threw this in NGSS, the Next Generation Science Standards. They've been adopted by New York State with some little bit of tweaking specific to New York State science standards. And a big push is having students work with real data. And one of the new teachers that we're working with she's not new at Farnsworth, but new to our relationship, said we really need to do something other than timing how long it takes nail polish to dry. So this is actually, they're looking for real data, and we certainly have lots of that here that can be accessible to teachers and students. So some new initiatives that we're working on right now. These are just a handful. There's more than I put up here, but we are working with the Teen Science Cafe Network. That's a national network. We are collaborating with MySci in Schenectady. They initiated this relationship, and now we're joining with them as a partner. Actually, that's where Grace is right now. She's at a conference about the Teen Science Cafe Network. So that's an opportunity. It's a monthly opportunity for teens in the Capital District to come and listen to a scientist speak. And then there's always a hands-on component to that as well. So not only are they listening to research that's taking place. They're also getting some kind of hands-on opportunity, whether it's just a discussion or some kind of field work with that researcher. So we will be splitting, there's 8 presentations per year, we will be doing 4, and my side will be doing 4. So that's another great opportunity for middle and high school students to get exposure to real science that's happening here in the Pine Bush. As Chris mentioned and Wendy mentioned, we are in the process of developing our new website. Part of the new website will be an educator and student resource section, where again, there will be data available on our website that teachers, if they're not able to come out here to the preserve for whatever reason, they can still have access to curricula and data that they can then use in the classrooms. So the website is going to offer a new opportunity to connect classrooms with the work that's happening here in the preserve. And then also new partnerships and ideas that are just starting right now that are very exciting. So going back to Farnsworth Middle School, they're restoring a pond on campus, and Jackie has been working with the teachers there to offer suggestions on how to restore the pond and make it an outdoor learning environment for students. And again, the teachers there are really gung-ho about getting their students outside and again, really looking to the Pine Bush for these authentic experiences. We also were recently approached by the Greater Capital Region Teacher Center, which offers a lot of resources to local teachers for programs and projects that they can initiate with their classrooms. And again, a lot of that is getting students involved with research. So there's a teacher at Shenendahowa that we've worked with over the years, and he is looking into doing teacher training there and having the Pine Bush host that. So, and looking again at different opportunities for data. We're also have a new partnership with Woodlawn Elementary. This is getting into the elementary school a little bit, but I wanted to put it in because it's very exciting. So if you've ever been to Woodlawn Elementary, you know it backs right up to the preserve. And they also are very interested in having their students learn more about the pine bush habitat, the pine barrens habitat that there's a remnant of right there adjacent to their school. So Jackie has been working really closely with them and training the teachers and also starting some new programs that will span all the grade levels at the school there. And again, it's getting students outside into the habitat, looking critically at the habitat.
Erin?
Yes.
The Teen Science Cafe, is that held at a time and a place where others can attend? Or is it specific for that audience?
It is specific for that audience, but our first demo run of the Teen Science Cafe here, we actually did combine it with one of our science lectures. So we had our science symposium here last April, and we combined that with our first Teen Science Cafe just to kind of give it a trial run. So that was an opportunity that was open to the public as well as to teens. But typically, it is really geared towards teens and their families and caregivers.
And are the science symposiums continuing?
Yes, those are continuing, absolutely, yes.
Right.
So, yep, those are happening here monthly.
Okay, you gonna make it happen, all right?
Absolutely, yes. Please come.
Just an
Yes.
older teenager, you know, I want to go.
Yeah, we actually have one tonight.
Where do they hold that? Here?
The
Cafes?
yes, here and at my side. Right,
And
yes,
they're open to anyone who can get to either of those?
yes, yep. So we're starting to spread the word with local school districts to get them involved. So, and this is a picture of Jen Ford. She's a student that's been involved for many years, along with Dr. Fierro, but now she's really kind of taken on the lead at Farnsworth, and she's very active here. She not only brings her students here, but she volunteers here. So, so lots of great things happening and in development. Does anybody have any questions? No? All right, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, next we'll hear from Cornell University, Sarah Neiman, and Neiman, I'm sorry, and Shona Alright.
And apparently, we're down to one projector.
Yeah, would it be all right if we moved this?
Absolutely.
Good morning. Thank you.
You can actually put that one light on if you want on the left side. No.
People can see on the other
Clearly. No, that's that's called really bad luck. Thank you.
And so what we're distributing is just a research brief discussing mostly our active people's attitudes towards active management of the preserve, as well as a descriptive summary of all of the results from our survey that we did. We'll talk a little bit more about, but specifically focus on people who live within 10 miles of the preserve, in line with the audience development plan.
Yes, so once again, my name is Shorna Allred, and I am a professor at Cornell University in the Department of Natural Resources, and work with the Human Dimensions Research Unit. And I just wanted to share a little bit about what the HDRU Human Dimensions Research Unit is before I turn it over to Sarah to talk about the research that we've been engaged with the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. So the HDRU is really a social science research unit within the Department of Natural Resources that really applies theory to real-world practice and engagement and informed decision-making around natural resource management issues. And so we work in a variety of different arenas, from fisheries to wildlife, water resources, invasive species, as well as a number of cross-cutting issues such as climate change, biodiversity conservation, and looking at social ecological systems. And yep, you can go to the next one. And so we're really excited about this partnership that we've had in looking at research around early successional habitat management in an urban environment with a very unique ecosystem here at the Albany Pine Bush Preserve, and it really relates to a lot of goals that we strive for in the Human Dimensions Research Unit, which is really to think about informed decision making, really integration of social and biological science for informed decision making, how to improve program development and evaluation, and really looking at contemporary natural resource issues and problems. And so we have a long history of working with natural resource agencies, from the USGS to EPA and state agencies like the DEC, but this is our very first project working with the Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission. So we're really excited about this. We have a number of faculty and graduate students. Sarah is a master's student at Cornell University, and this has been the subject of her master's research, is really to delve into understanding awareness and propensity for action and support and other types of decision making about early successional habitats. So she'll be sharing with you the research that she's done in collaboration with Neil and Aaron, who've been wonderful partners, and we just wanted to thank Chris and Keith and the Preserve and the Commission for inviting us here to speak.
Not only is this a first for having the social science in the preserve, but it's the first we've had.
And both on the same day.
First today.
I can.
Give him a second.
Anybody want coffee?
That broke too.
Sure, you give a handout.
That is in the land plan.
This way, so we don't
Yeah, it's linked to the land plan. Remember how it took so long to block?
What are the statistical odds of them both going down?
So if we could, I could just do some brief kind of overview about our project.
Yeah.
That'd be great. If that's okay.
So
Do some
Sarah has a handout that she's going to go over while we wait.
So just a brief talk about the project. This had started back in 2015, so it's a couple years long. And we had some objectives that I'll go through. But one of the focuses, at least that we worked with Neil and Aaron, was a concern about people's acceptance of management practices and their likelihood to oppose them. So how likely are people going to go up and protest or call or do that kind of stuff? So we specifically made a 2-pager research brief that goes through how people generally feel about management practices, focusing on 4 of the main ones used at the Albany Pine Bush. So prescribed burns, invasive removal, cutting to create openings in the forest, and mowing of small trees and shrubs. And so we have the green bar at the top is just positive attitudes, and the orange-red areas are negative attitudes. We have people's awareness of whether or not the Albany Pine Bush uses those preserves. And then finally, we have a chart as well as descriptives of people's likelihood to oppose. And so some conclusions and recommendations that we provide for both land managers if they are using those types of active management practices and environmental educators about ways to effectively communicate about active management. So that's this colorful piece here. And I'll go through some of those results in our presentation today. And then in addition, we did a survey of residents and visitors living within 10 miles of the preserve to try to create a baseline understanding in line with the audience development plan to really understand where people are as far as awareness, appreciation, knowledge, and support. And so we have also copies of the surveys, but this has all of the questions as well as the percent of respondents for each question. So if you're interested in particular areas, we did comparisons between like forested and open landscapes to see how people felt about it, as well as support behaviors, socio-demographics, attitudes, assessments of risk, so how much they think that the preserve is at risk of being lost to development or to lack of use or things like that. So definitely feel free to take a look through that, and if you want to talk more about the survey, we can afterwards, and we have the full copy as well. So, and hopefully we'll be up and running. Or if you guys have any questions too.
Sarah, was it a phone? It was a telephone survey?
So our survey, we did a mail survey. So we had a sample of 1,200 residential landowners within 10 miles of the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. So it was from Albany, Schenectady, Saratoga, and Rensselaer counties, directly like the buffer zone. And we also oversampled for visitors to try to really understand visitor engagement. What do people value? What kinds of programs do they attend? So we did another sample of 1,200 of Albany Pine Bush users. And so that was a web survey to supplement it. And overall, we received 430 responses. And so it's about 23%, response rate.
Just out of curiosity. Oh, back.
We're back.
So that response rate, how does it compare? Maybe that's not a question for you because this is your project.
Oh.
For sure. How does that compare to other projects that you've done for surveys? As for response rate, I would assume that's pretty reasonable.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Not high.
We actually are doing research on this. We found that response rates have been declining over time to surveys, which is probably no surprise to people in this room as there's more demand on our time. And so, yeah, usually 20 to 30% is what we tend to get, especially with general public surveys. If we survey forest landowners, it tends to be a little higher, there's more salience with the topic perhaps, but yeah, that's a very respectable response rate from a social science standpoint. And we did things like assess for response bias to test whether we got a representative sample of respondents that did, and found that was the case. So.
Great.
Yeah, usually the benchmark is 20% is the minimum to be, or at least to be deemed acceptable in the social science realm.
Sarah, I saw in this, and maybe you're going to talk about this, but there were more people negative about mowing than burning?
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, we'll talk about it.
Are you going to get to that?
But our thoughts from it is, at least going through, we'll get to it, but the brief answer is we think that potentially the outreach and education that the preserve has been doing specific to burn. So doing the mailings, making sure that individuals like the managers are accessible to the public and answering questions and concerns. We did some interviews and things to kind of tease that out, but as long as people know that it's safe that it's safe and there isn't a lot of smoke that's going to influence their health for the most part. They seem to be pretty accepting of the use of the fire.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's a good job on that.
Yeah.
You would think intuitively it'd be the opposite, right?
Well, but fire, remember, fire started in 91. And this mechanical work at a large scale is much more recent.
And mechanical work tends to be, in the literature, opposed more. Because you're changing the landscape from a forested to a more open landscape, and that's not as aesthetically potentially pleasing for most individuals. And so this change with the cutting and mowing, it's not too surprising that those are maybe the more negative, people have more negative attitudes. Yeah. Anyway, so now that we have the projector up, I'm gonna just go through an overview of what this project aimed to do. Like I said, it started a couple years ago, and so we had 4 main objectives. The first was to provide this baseline understanding of awareness and appreciation of people within 10 miles of the preserve. Second was to understand the impact of programming on people's knowledge and action. Third, identify any barriers that there may be to people's knowledge or action. And finally, identify potential improvements to the Albany Pine Bush's education and communication or outreach efforts. And so today, the way I structured the presentation is we're going to go through each objective, and we're going to pull key findings from both interviews that we did as well as our survey, which you guys have in front of you. So for the baseline understanding, we talked about it a little bit as far as our methodology. So just a refresher, we sampled 1,200 residents through a 4-stage mailing process that's common in the social science literature by Dillman. And then 1,200 Albany Pine Bush users and got a response rate of about 23%. And like I mentioned earlier, with working with Neil and Aaron, we wanted to focus on the intention to oppose management practices. So similar to what's in those research briefs, we'll focus our results on attitudes towards management practices, individuals' awareness about the Albany Pine Bush's use of the management practices, their intention to oppose. And then the last component was, when we were initially designing this project, was an intention to politically support the preserve going forward. So if the preserve lost money, could you call on the public, and will they respond with letters of support, donating money, those kinds of behaviors. So we'll investigate those as well. So to start, this is a little bit different from the research brief, but we have our percent of respondents on the left here, and then negative attitudes are in red, and the positive attitudes are in green. And what we see is overall, prescribed burns and invasive removal are the 2 most accepted, or people have the most positive attitudes towards those management practices. And in contrast, we see that the cutting and mowing have higher negative attitudes associated with them and significantly lower acceptance in the positive category as well. So those aren't as accepted by the public.
Is the difference between 100%, I mean, those don't add up to 100% each, so is there indifference too?
Yes, there is a neutral category, but we were looking at the extreme. So the neutral category is in that research brief, it's the middle gray category. But for this, it just seemed easier to have the 2 extremes for the story. If we move towards awareness of management practices, we see a similar trend where prescribed burns, about 83% of respondents were aware of the preserve's use of prescribed burns, followed by invasive removal, and then just under half were aware of the use of cutting or mowing. And so one of the big questions we had was, well, if people have these negative attitudes, if they're rather aware of the use of the management practices, how likely are they to oppose? And what we find with this red bar here is that overall they're really not. So we see the lowest intention to oppose with about 5% of people saying they would oppose burns, and the highest being with cutting, with about 13% of respondents. But overall, I think it was just under 13% would oppose any of the management practices.
So, Sarah, there's an opportunity to, in the last 2, the cut and mow, we've got a lot of folks who don't feel one way or another, so there's an opportunity to bring them over to the blue.
Well, these are just the
I suspect
opposing.
the reds are going to stay red.
Yeah, so this is the opposing, and then this is just their level of awareness. So of the 43% of people who are aware of the use of mowing, we have about 8% are going to oppose it. Is kind of what's the main idea from this graphic. As for the 10-mile radius, if we switch gears to support, we looked at 6 different support behaviors. We looked at 3 civic behaviors. So these are talking positively, visiting the preserve, attending a program. and 3 political behaviors, so donating money, writing letters of support, and volunteering. And I think what's not too surprising from the comparison between the two is that individuals are much more likely to perform civic behaviors like talking positively than they are to do other things, like other more political things like donating money, writing letters. But of the political behaviors, we still see about 28% of individuals are willing to donate specifically to the preserve, which is something really interesting. If we look at this a little bit further and do a breakdown of visitor versus non-visitor, we see across the board, across civic and political behaviors, that there's the visitors in orange are more likely to support than the non-visitors here in purple on the right. So moving on to the impact of programs, the way that we kind of focused on this was taking our survey and pulling out all of the visitors and then comparing the visitors based on different types of visitors and how often they frequented the preserve, the types of programs they attended, and comparing them across knowledge and support variables. And so the way we identified visitors, we did a cluster analysis based on how people used the preserve, whether it was to relax, recreate, socialize, learn, or some other reason. And then also, as I mentioned, how frequently they had visited in the last 12 months. And what we found is that there's 3 types of visitors that come to the Albany Pine Bush. We have our neutral neighbors, our educated learners, and our engaged supporters. And so our neutral neighbors, either they don't visit or they don't visit very frequently, or they use the preserve for some other reason. They tend to be an older group who have lived in the area for a very long time and tend to be the parents to older children. Our educated learners only come to learn. And so they visit between 1 to 5 times in the last year, and they're willing to come from the furthest away, so more than 10 miles away, in order to attend children's programs because they tend to be the parents of young children. And then our engaged supporters, they really rely on the preserve for a variety of things, to recreate, socialize, learn. And so they live the closest to the preserve, they visit the most frequently, and they're also the most likely to be a part of the protective groups, such as the Friends of the Pine Bush. And so when we look at these based on knowledge levels and support, I think it makes sense that these engaged supporters, they are the most knowledgeable because they interact with the preserve in the most, in programs in the most way, and they're also the most likely to support. And in contrast, our neutral neighbors who don't really engage too much, they're the least knowledgeable and least likely to support. And our educated learners just kind of fall somewhere in the middle. They're pretty knowledgeable, but when it comes to actual support behaviors, they're a little different. And so if we look at support behaviors, again, we have our civic behaviors on the left and our political behaviors on the right. And what we see is generally between this yellow and green line, so these are the educated learners and the engaged supporters, they're about the same on our civic behavior side. But when we move to the political area, we see these huge differences, especially in writing letters of support and volunteering their time. And then overall, we see lower levels of neutral neighbors. So indicating if you did want to call for political support, these engaged supporters are really the audience that you need to tap into. And finally, we combined objectives 3 and 4, looking at barriers to knowledge and action, as well as potential improvements to the outreach and education. And we assessed this using a handful of interviews, in-depth interviews with residents and visitors who interacted with the preserve in a variety of ways, as well as, again, looking at what do particular visitors value about the preserve and using that to target message. So for the interviewees, we asked a variety of questions. One was, what are ways that the Albany Pine Bush can be improved? And one of the most common responses was outreach. So a really common narrative from the individuals I talked to was that they had been living in the area for several years, some as many as 15 years, and they had no idea that the Albany Pine Bush existed. And so from their point of view, there could be a lot more outreach that could raise awareness about the programming, the existence of the preserve, and the trails. On a related note, individuals were also had noted that they weren't really sure, A, how the Albany Pine Bush was funded, or B, if the Albany Pine Bush needed financial or political support, in what ways they could actually help the Pine Bush. And so this led to their second improvement opportunity, which was promoting community involvement. And interviewees provided suggestions for what the Albany Pine Bush could do. And one was potentially having more fundraisers or events similar to Lupin Fest. And one of the interviewees suggested that this would raise raise money for the Albany Pine Bushes programs and maintenance, as well as raising community awareness and providing more opportunities for volunteers to get involved with the Pine Bush and have a hands-on experience. A second suggestion, which wasn't as but related to not knowing what to do, was having workshops in order to teach people how to actively or effectively politically support the preserve. So how do you write an effective letter to your legislator? How do you interact in a town hall meeting or attend a town hall meeting? Things that they said that they would like to do, but they didn't know how. A second area that was talked about by the interviewees were their views about the Albany Pine Bush Preserve, which could be used to help inform education and outreach materials. So the positives were that they really valued the fact that the preserve is protecting land from development in the area, especially given how urbanized everything is around the pine bush. And in comparison to local green spaces, the pine bush was really unique. They valued that it was free and that it was close to home, had really well-maintained trails, and offered low-cost children's programming. So these are elements that would be really good to highlight in outreach. As for the negatives, individuals mentioned the sound or view of the highway kind of diminishing their experience on the trails. And a second negative really had to do with inhibiting people from visiting. And so people talked about negative perceptions that they held. And these included the belief that it's infested with ticks, the fact that the Discovery Center is only for young children and not for adults or for older children, and that they think that the preserve is boring, or that they would prefer other landscapes that are more mountainous or have water or have dense forests. And so these are elements that that would it would be good to address in outreach materials in order if you did want to improve visitation. Yeah, I feel like this is a common thing that most people have probably heard. The other thing that was really interesting talking with interviewees though was that even though they had these negative perceptions going in, once they visited, they said that it completely changed, that they continue to visit the preserve for some of these reasons stated over here, that they see that it is such a unique place, that they do see that the Discovery Center isn't only for children, but also for adults. And so keeping that in mind, that perhaps visitation can also help counter some of these negative perceptions. And so the last thing that we looked at was going back to those visitor types and really looking at what do people value and how can we target messaging to each different type of user. There is a change to the percent of respondents. This only goes up to 40% just for reference. But again, we have the neutral neighbors in orange, educated learners in yellow, and our engaged supporters in green. And so what we see is potentially for, if you're targeting the engaged supporters, talking about programs in the Discovery Center would be really salient with that audience. For our neutral neighbors in orange, the ecosystem, as well as in the corner we have our the aesthetic view, or how close it is to home, the fact that they like having it in their backyard may be a more salient messaging. And then educated learners, the ecosystem and the trails also seem to be pretty salient with that group as well. So keeping that in mind when you're trying to target a particular group, what might be the most salient in garnering support. And so what does this all mean? So we have some final conclusions and overall recommendations across the objectives. So for public awareness and appreciation, overall, individuals weren't intending to oppose management practices, which is good. Like we mentioned before, prescribed burns were the most accepted and least likely to be opposed. And so potentially the outreach and education materials that the Albany Pine Bush is doing around the prescribed burns could then be applied to some of the more controversial management practices such as the cutting and the mowing. Second, the public is less likely to support the preserve politically, so if that's something that's of interest, that should be something that is taken into consideration. It doesn't mean that people, when called upon, may not actually politically engage, but at this point we're not really sure what they would do in the future. Unless you're talking about donating money, where 28% of people are still willing to donate to the preserve. For the impacted programs, so again, looking across those different knowledge types, or different visitor types, we found that as individuals attend more programs, they're more likely to perform civic behaviors and also have higher knowledge levels overall. And so if you want people to be more like those engaged supporters and have that political component, potentially promoting more complex interactions with the preserve. So if you have a dog runner and you can convince them to come to the preserve to also learn and socialize, they may be more likely to support, or the opposite, if you have someone who only comes for programming, convince them to come for running or some other combination of attachments. For the knowledge barriers, definitely along a similar vein, make sure that you're appealing to other value types, not only the environment, but also recreation, relaxation, and education. And when identifying what people can do, make sure in outreach and education material that there are clear, like, will you please write a letter of support, or donate money, or just talk positively, make clear what you want your constituents to do. And finally, address some of the negative perceptions about the preserve. So the idea that it's infested with ticks, especially the Discovery Center only being for young children, and the boring landscape, which may be more difficult to do. But our last element is improving the education and outreach. And so we talked about tailoring outreach and communication to visitor type. So this was appealing to basically that backyard view for the neutral neighbors. Educated learners really focusing on children and children's program is a place that you can come with your family. And engaged supporters focusing on the variety of programs and the availability of the Discovery Center as selling points for these people. These may seem like general recommendations, and that's because they're not finished yet. So we are still in the process of working on an exhibit evaluation tool, which will give us specific information about how to improve the exhibits at the Discovery Center, and look at how that influences knowledge as well as action. And so we're working with Dr. Carlin Buckler at the Cooperstown Graduate Program, and they focus exclusively on science exhibit or museum science evaluation. And so we're working with them to implement a pilot study by the end of this month, and should have some more concrete recommendations by the end of this year. So thank you, and we'll take any other questions you guys might have. Thank you.
Bravo.
Sorry, it's a lot of information, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone laughed at the tick thing, but I think that's a real issue for a lot of our public places, so I'm glad you found that. But did you find out anything about what the barriers towards visitation are? Like, is it an issue of, are there barriers, like transportation barriers? Did this get into that at all, or no?
It didn't exclusively. So we had focused mostly on individuals within 10 miles. We had talked to interviewees a little bit, and I talked to 9 people, even though I reached out to about 40, which is typical. Yeah. But I did do intercepts at malls and asked, like, what is the one thing, like, what inhibits you from visiting the Albany Pine Bush? And a lot of people just said more information. They just didn't know what it was. I think a couple people talked about it being too far. Okay. But they also lived more than 10 miles away from the preserve, okay, which made sense. But really the key component that kind of came out was this lack of awareness, or they wish they just knew more about it because they'd be willing to travel. Yeah, but we also didn't get a lot of, like, people from inner city or things like that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Did you do any on-trail surveys of the users?
Yeah, so I did intercepts. Let's see if I have it. Okay, yeah, so we did intercepts, and we did them on the trails at Cross Gates, Colony Shopping Center, and the Gilderland Library. And we just kind of tried grabbing people, asked them 5 quick questions about where they lived, had they ever visited, what comes to mind when they think of the Albany Pine Bush, and if they hadn't visited, what would it take for them to visit. And so some of the ticks elements came out of the trail individuals, but those were individuals that also did the interviews, the 30 to 40 minute interviews that we did. Did you have any other questions about the trail surveys, or?
Well, I'm just curious if if you're trying to reach out beyond that 10 mile, so that the Pine Bush Preserve becomes a destination.
Right.
Is what could happen to draw people in? I mean, some communities have the oceanfront and you have beaches, and they become just a spot for Audubon. People just swarm there as the birds migrate. as more and more bird studies and tagging is occurring here, is that something that all of a sudden people may say, well, there's, for example, the largest warbler that was just seen in 60 some odd years. Yeah. That group of people going to come into Bush hopefully to see something that they haven't seen in that area.
Yeah.
And that's just one example. I mean,
Yeah.
because there's so many other studies that are going on. For example, butterfly, people are going to come in June to try to see the first brood of butterflies because that's just it's a phenomenon and they want to be able to see that.
I think some people that I had talked to, I know one of them was very knowledgeable about like the different seasons and what is occurring. So like when the lupin comes up, when you're most likely to see the Carner blue. Also, I think there were a good handful of people. It wasn't indicated in our visitor type, but in the other category that were there specifically for wildlife recreation, mostly bird watching or lepidoptery. So yeah, looking at butterflies. I don't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but I do remember that was something that did draw people. I think really the unique environment and really the trails and the fact that it was free for most people in comparison to other places where you would have to pay to use trails for recreation really are what drove people. And I think from intercepts, yeah, the first thing that came to mind was trails and hiking, and then followed by the butterfly. And then other things that came to mind was the fact that it was a natural space or that it was close in your backyard, that it was a preserve or park that involved some type of pine tree. Yeah, I mean these are coded obviously, but the animals, like a general animal wildlife is relatively low compared to like butterflies specifically. And potentially birding, and it could just be the audience that we got. So it's a potential. Yeah.
Sarah, can you talk about how you control for bias so that you're not biasing it with people that are more likely to say good things or positive things about the
preserve? Yeah. Let me pull up I have a slide for that. So basically, what we did, as Shorna had mentioned, is we looked at non-response data. So basically I'll pull this all up. So non-response data were telephone surveys of people that we gave a mail survey or web survey to, but they didn't respond to us. So we had their contact information and we're able to follow up with 5 main questions about their awareness of the preserve, if so, how did they use it, general socio-demographic information, age, gender, and then how important it was to protect the Albany pine bush and why they didn't complete the survey. And so when we compared against the non-response, we found that there weren't any significant differences. In addition, because we were looking at the 10-mile radius, we wanted to compare it to census data and see our sample was predominantly white, wealthy, well-educated individuals, and so we weren't sure how representative that was of the area. And so we looked at averages by county, so the 4 counties we sampled. And we didn't see any significant differences that were too egregious. But this wasn't a direct representation of what the full population looked like because we did a 10-mile radius, and it was like just parts of Albany County or parts of Saratoga. So we tried to estimate as best we could. But yeah, no significant differences. So it seemed like it was pretty representative, at least as this baseline.
Sarah, I find it pretty interesting. So neutral neighbors are people who live here, but they're apathetic.
Yeah, they didn't have negative support, but they fell on average were about 3 out of 5 scale, so that's that neutral. Yeah.
But yet 72% of them would talk positively about the preserve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I find that interesting.
Yeah, so that's kind of going back to the civic versus the political, but they are also the lowest on the political side. So if talking positively is something that you're interested in, then it looks like there's a pretty good base of individuals who they come here, they enjoy their experience, and they're willing to tell other people, hey, you should visit the Albany Pine Bush, it's this really cool place. But when it comes to, hey, would you be willing to write your congressman, or would you be willing to help us sign petitions or canvass for petitions or things like that, it seems like that group would be the first to be like, nope, I'm good. Yeah, or that's not me.
Yep.
get any comments? Did you get any comments from folks about their perception of the building from 155 and the grounds?
That wasn't an exclusive thing. I got a few people talked about that in the interviews, but that wasn't a question I asked in the survey. From the interviews, some people were just like, hey, what is that? Is it like a museum? What kind of thing is it? They weren't really sure at first about it. But then once they knew what it was, I think some interviewees visited, but most had not, because again, there was this perception that once they found out it was a discovery center, they thought it was only for children. Yeah. Yeah.
The people that you talked to that were unaware, or had lack of awareness, did you get any indication of how they usually receive information?
Oh, I wish.
Me too.
I wish, yeah. I don't think, we didn't ask about how, like, where they got their information from, or how they received it. I think for space issues, we were trying to focus mostly on the management practices and support and things, and what people valued. But yeah, maybe on the next round of surveys, doing a focus on the communication aspect of how do people actually receive the information, how do they integrate it and make decisions or behavior decisions based on that. There's some literature on how you can actually do that through questionnaire form. Yeah, but that would be a really interesting next study.
Yes.
Yeah. So this was just mostly to try to provide that baseline and try to look at some other areas as well, and then hopefully other social science projects can be developed in line with the Albany Pine Bush to explore some of these other like communication and outreach components. Okay.
Sarah, can you explain to me your reasoning behind on your bar graphs putting volunteerism on the political side versus the civic side?
Yeah, I'll pull up that slide. So in the literature, as far as research goes, volunteerism tends to be more of a political behavior. I know that in the context of the Albany Pine Bush, I think it probably seems like it's more of a, it might fall more on the civic side, but I think the idea is that volunteering not only to do burns or to work at the front desk, but also a political volunteerism could be like canvassing. So actually having people go out in residential areas and asking, hey, will you sign this petition to protect the funding for the Albany Pine Bush, and trying to get signatures and on the ground. So I put it in the political realm, but I guess it kind of straddles in between.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any questions? Thank you for your time, and
Thank you very much.
Thanks again.
Yeah, I was going to ask, can we get a copy for the board of the PowerPoint and this?
Yeah.
This
You do that electronically?
Yeah, electronically.
Yeah.
And this one too?
Yeah, I have PDF versions of all of the documents that I can send to Neil to distribute, or if you get them to me.
And Sarah, can you or Shorna talk about the other products that we're going to get as a result of
Yeah, I was going to
this
mention
project?
that a couple of other products that are still in the works is a full-length research report, which will go over all of the survey results. So the Human Dimensions Research Unit research report. So that'll be coming out by the end of this semester, by December. And then the exhibit evaluation will have a report associated with that as well, that's really delving into the Discovery Center exhibits and the evaluation associated with that. All of these will be available online on they'll be a permanent place on the HDRU website, and we'd be happy to share PDFs and to really get the information out.
Yeah, the HDRU report will also have, similar to this, how it has recommendations. It'll have some overall recommendations, and we'll try to have some that are specific or relate directly to the Albany Pine Bush with all of our methodology, and then also how this applies to other preserves or land managers, educators, and try to share the knowledge with other people and help them be more effective as well.
Randall's thesis ready to go.
Oh, and I'm working on my thesis. So I'm defending all of this material on November 1st, and so Neil and Aaron are gonna come and watch and support. So it's a process. Thanks. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I guess we're done if there's, unless there's something else somebody wants to bring up. Any other business? Okay. Guess can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
Second. All right, great.